Marcus Webb was 39 years old the night his wife looked him in the eye across a dinner table he had built with his own hands and told him she was done waiting. She sighed it calmly, the way people say things they have rehearsed many times in rooms you were not in. She said she had consulted an attorney. She said she was entitled to half of everything. She set a manila folder on the table between the dinner plates, still warm, barely touched, and slid it across to him like she was closing a deal she had already won. He looked at the folder. He did not open it. He looked at her instead, at the particular stillness in her face, the rehearsed composure of someone who has prepared for your reaction and is ready to manage it. And he thought about something his grandmother used to say when he was young and impatient, and certain he understood a situation he had only just walked into. Baby, a date is a document, but ownership is a different kind of thing entirely. He picked up the folder. He set it beside his plate. He said, "I'll have my attorney review this." She waited for more. There was no more. What Simone Mercer Wallace did not know, what she had apparently never thought to ask in 7 years of marriage, was that the house she was standing in, the house she intended to claim half of, was not in her husband's name. It was not in his name because it had never needed to be. What she also did not know was how many other things fell into that same category. She would find out. The process of finding out would take exactly one mediation session and approximately 45 minutes. What happened in those 45 minutes would redefine the word entitled for the rest of her life. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The house was a colonial revival on a quiet street in the Druid Hills section of Atlanta. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a detached workshop in the back, where Darius Wallace spent his Saturday mornings the way other men spent theirs watching television. He had built the workshop himself, framed it, wired it, poured the concrete floor in sections over 3 weekends. Inside was the organized calm of a man who understood that every tool had one correct place, and that the time you spent looking for something was time you had already lost. Darius was 38 years old and had been a licensed general contractor for 15 of them. It was the kind of man whose hands told you what his clothes did not. Calloused at the base of the fingers, precise in their movements, accustomed to measuring twice and cutting once. He drove a work truck that needed a wash. He wore the same 3 brands of work boots in rotation. He was unremarkable to people who assessed men by surfaces, which was not an accident. His father, Eugene Wallace, had run a small but serious construction company out of Macon for 30 years before his heart gave out at 61. Eugene had never been wealthy by the measure of people who talked about wealth. He had been wealthy by the measure of people who understood it. He used to tell Darius when he was learning the trade beside him, "Son, the man who builds the building doesn't always put his name on the outside. That doesn't change who built it." Darius had understood that lesson in a professional sense for years. It had taken him longer to understand it applied to everything else. He had met Simone at the charity auction 8 years ago. She was in real estate marketing, polished, well-networked, the kind of person who entered a room and immediately understood its social architecture. She had laughed at something he said that most people didn't find funny, and he had taken that as a sign of depth. It was, he would later understand, a sign of attention. Those are different skills. The early years were good in the way early years often are. Busy, forward-moving, full of plans that felt like shared purpose. She had built her client base. He had built his business. They had bought the Druid Hills house together, or so the story went when she told it to her friends. When she said, "We bought a house in Druid Hills," there was a particular weight she put on the sentence, a proprietary satisfaction in the telling. Darius had never corrected her. He had filed the paperwork correctly. That was enough. The sign he should have paid more attention to came about 14 months before the folder appeared on the dinner table. It was a Sunday afternoon. Anhe had come in from the workshop to find Simone on the back porch with her phone pressed to her ear, speaking in the lowered register she used when she did not want to be overheard but had not checked whether she was alone. It caught only a fragment. He's not as established as he thinks he is. Before she registered his presence and shifted tone so cleanly it might have been a different conversation. A had set that fragment in a mental drawer and returned to his work. He was a builder. He had learned long ago that you did not demolish a wall until you were certain what was behind it. The folder arrived on a Tuesday evening in March. Inside it were divorce petition documents, a financial disclosure form she had partially completed, and a handwritten note from her attorney, one Raymond Osei, whose office address Marcos recognized as being 2 blocks from Simone's workplace, indicating that they were prepared to proceed on an expedited timeline. E read every page at the kitchen table while she watched from across it. E noted the assets she had listed. The Druid Hills house, appraised at $740,000. The joint checking account, her personal vehicle, his work truck, a joint savings account with $22,000 in it. He noted what was not listed. Everything else. He closed the folder. He placed both hands flat on the table. He said, "I'll have Patricia take a look." "Who's Patricia?" Simone said. He looked at her. "My attorney," he said. She had not known he had one. He went to the workshop after dinner and made 2 phone calls. The first was to Patricia Odom, family and estate attorney, whose office was in Buckhead and who had been his family's legal advisor for nearly 2 decades. The second was to his business partner Raymond, not Raymond Osei. His Raymond Tate, who managed the financial architecture of the Wallace Group's holdings from a second-floor office in Decatur, and who, when Darius explained the situation in 4 sentences, said only, "I'll pull the portfolio summary. You want the full picture or the version for court?" "Full picture first," Darius said. "Then we'll decide what they need to see." He stood in the workshop for a while after the calls, in the organized quiet of it, and looked at the framing nailer mounted on its peg beside the level and the chalk line. His father had given him that nailer when he got his contractor's license. It was older than his marriage by 11 years. The man who builds the building, he thought. He went back inside. He slept without difficulty. Patricia Odom's office was the kind of room that communicated competence without trying to. The furniture was good and old. The bookshelves were actually used. She had a way of listening that made most people say more than they intended, not through manipulation, but because her attention was complete and people responded to being fully heard by filling the silence. She reviewed Raymond Tate's portfolio summary with her reading glasses on and said nothing for 6 minutes. Darius sat across from her and drank the coffee she'd poured without being asked. "The Druid Hills property," she said finally, without looking up, "transferred to the family trust 11 years ago," he said, "before the marriage." She turned a page. "The Vine City Building, LRSA, established 8 years ago, 1 year before the wedding. My name is not the operating member of record." She looked up. "The Happeville Warehouse. Same LLC. The 4 residential units in East Point. Trust." She took off her glasses. She looked at him the way she had looked at him since he was 19 years old and sitting in the same office with his father. "Darius," she said, "what exactly does she think you own?" "The truck," he said. "The joint account. Half the house." Patricia was quiet for a moment. She filed a financial disclosure. "I have it." And she listed the truck and the joint accounts and the house. "Yes." Patricia set the portfolio summary on the desk and looked at it without reading it. "The house appraises at $740. "Correct." "And the trust was established when?" 11 years ago in November. My grandmother's trust, updated when she passed. The property transferred at the same time." Patricia folded her hands on the desk. "Raymond Osei," she said. "I know his work. He's competent at the transactional level. Is going to walk into mediation expecting a standard asset negotiation on a $740,000 property." She paused. "He is going to have a difficult morning." She sighed it without pleasure. It was simply a factual projection, the kind of thing she had learned to state plainly after 30 years. "I want to make sure we are airtight," Darius said. "We are airtight," Patricia said. "But I want a forensic accounting review of the joint accounts for the past 36 months. If she has been moving money in anticipation of this, I want it documented before she documents us." She picked up her pen. "Give me 2 weeks." It gave her 2 weeks. He spent those 2 weeks the way he had spent the weeks before the folder arrived. Going to work, managing his crews, reviewing project timelines, eating dinner across from a woman who believed she was 3 steps ahead of him. She mentioned the divorce twice in that period, both times with the careful casualness of someone testing whether a thing they said has landed. She mentioned the process and the timeline and, once, what will each walk away with. He responded to each mention with a nod and a minimal answer, and gave her nothing to read. It was a contractor. He understood that the reveal happened at the end. You covered the walls after the wiring was done, not before. The forensic review, completed in 11 days by an accountant named Dennis Flowers, who Patricia had used for 20 years, found what Darius had suspected but had not yet confirmed. Over the 22 months prior to the filing, Simon had transferred a total of $38,400 from joint accounts into a personal savings account held in her maiden name at a bank in Marietta. The transfers were distributed across 17 separate transactions, no single, one large enough to trigger a notification threshold. They were categorized across the joint ledger as household utilities and personal health and vehicle maintenance. Months in which Darius noted their vehicles had not been serviced, their utilities had not increased, and Simon had not purchased so much as a gym membership. Dennis Flowers laid the documentation on Patricia's desk in 2 neat stacks and said, "This is about as clean a dissipation pattern as I've seen." She wasn't hiding it from a professional. She was hiding it from a husband she believed wasn't watching. Darius was always watching. He was just quiet about it. The mediation was held on a Thursday morning at a neutral office in Midtown Atlanta. Patricia had selected the location. It was on the 14th floor. The city spread out below the windows in the particular way Atlanta spreads, low and wide and green with trees, even in the developed areas. A city that kept its canopy even as it built. Simon arrived with Raymond Osei, who was younger than Darius had imagined. Mid-40s, sharp suit, the confident stride of a man who had won this kind of thing before and expected to win it again. He set a slim leather portfolio on the conference table and shook Patricia's hand with the professional courtesy of opposing counsel, who has sized up the other side and found nothing alarming. Darius was already seated. He had a glass of water. He had a second folder in front of him, slightly thicker than the one Simone had placed on their dinner table 6 weeks prior. Simone sat down across from him. She looked composed. She had a particular expression she wore in professional settings. Neutral, self-assured, the expression of a woman who had prepared, and she wore it now. Patricia opened the proceedings with a brief summary and distributed the documentation packages. One for Osei, one for the mediator, one retained. Osei opened his package and began reviewing. The first page was the trust documentation for the Druid Hills property. The trust had been established 11 years prior. The transfer of the property into the trust was recorded 4 months after that, a full 11 months before the marriage license. The trust's operating language was standard but unambiguous. The property was held in perpetuity as an asset of the Wallace Family Trust. It was not a marital asset. It had never been a marital asset. The marriage had taken place inside a house that was not, in any legally actionable sense, available to be divided. Osei read it once. Then he read it again. He set it down and turned to the second page, which was the LLC documentation for the Vine City commercial property. The third page covered the Happyville warehouse. Pages 4 through 7 addressed the East Point residential units. The room was very quiet. Simone was watching Osei's face. Darius was watching Simone. Osei closed his package. He looked at Patricia with an expression that had shed its earlier confidence in favor of something more careful. The residential property in Druid Hills was disclosed in the petition as a joint marital asset, he said. Incorrectly, Patricia said, without inflection. As the documentation indicates, my client has resided in that property for 7 years. Residence does not confer ownership interest. The property was transferred to the Wallace Family Trust in November of the year prior to the marriage and has been held there continuously. Mr. Wallace's counsel ensured at the time of the marriage that the trust structure was correctly maintained. She set her pen down. The marital estate consists of the joint checking account, the joint savings account, and the 2 personal vehicles. We have a full accounting. She produced the second set of documents and slid them forward. We also have a forensic review of the past 36 months of joint account activity, which documents a pattern of transfers totaling $38,400 into a personal account in Mrs. Wallace's maiden name. Under Georgia statute, that pattern constitutes dissipation of marital assets. We are not requesting full recovery in these proceedings. We are providing it as context for the court's discretion in final distribution of the remaining marital estate. Simone's composure had shifted. It did not collapse. She was too controlled for that. But something changed behind her eyes, a recalculation happening at speed. The look of someone who has walked into a room expecting to find one thing and found instead a completely different set of dimensions. She looked at Darius. He looked back at her. "You let me believe," she started. "I never told you what I owned," he said quietly. "You assumed. I didn't correct the assumption." He paused. "That's not the same as a lie. Darius, you hired an attorney 22 months ago," he said. "I know because Dennis found the retainer payment in the account review. You have been planning this for almost 2 years." He said it without heat, without accusation, the way you read coordinates off a map, factually, because the map is what it is. "I didn't plan it, Simone. I built it. There's a difference. I've been building it since before you knew my name." Jose leaned toward his client and spoke low. Whatever he said produces a stillness in her that was different from the composed stillness she had carried in. This was the stillness of a person absorbing a structural fact they cannot revise. Darius stood. He buttoned his jacket, the same jacket he wore to every site walkthrough, charcoal, dependable, unremarkable to people who read men by their clothes. He gathered his folder. "Patricia will finish the details," he said to the room. He looked at Simone one final time. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the clear-eyed finality of a man who has looked at a completed structure and confirmed that it was built to hold. "I wish you well," he said, and he walked out. The elevator opened onto the lobby. He stepped through the glass doors onto the street. The morning was bright and warm in the particular Atlanta way of late spring, heavy with green, the air already carrying the day's heat. Ed drove south. He had a job site in Happyville that needed his eye that afternoon. A renovación on a Forticera duplex that the Wallace Group had acquired 6 months prior and was converting into 2 long-term affordable rentals. His foreman, a Kiet man named Calvin who had worked for Darius's father before he worked for Darius, was already on site. When Darius arrived, Calvin handed him a coffee and walked him through the framing progress without unnecessary conversation, which was one of the things Darius valued most about him. They stood in the framed-out second unit and looked at the bones of the thing, the new header over the window opening, the correctly spaced studs, the rough plumbing running clean through the floor joists. "Looks right," Darius said. "Looks right," Calvin agreed. That was enough. 16 months passed. The Druid Hills house had new floors by autumn. White oak, white plank, installed by Darius over 2 weekends with his cousin Marcus, helping the second day. He replanted the front beds. He rebuilt the back porch steps with better lumber than what had been there before, properly flashed at the ledger board, the kind of detail that would outlast a decade. He met Jade at a city planning meeting in November, a landscape architect who had been brought in to consult on a greenway project adjacent to one of his developments. She asked questions that indicated she had read the site plan before coming. She disagreed with one of his structural assumptions and turned out to be correct. He respected that immediately and told her so. She seemed neither surprised nor particularly pleased, which he found refreshing. They had dinner twice in December, and by February, she was bringing plants over on Saturday mornings and explaining their requirements while he made coffee. She did not perform for him. He did not perform for her. The whole thing was, in this way, a relief. Simone's situation arrived to him passively, the way information about former lives does, sideways through people he still shared geography with. A brokerage had asked her to step back from client-facing work following the financial review disclosure, which had become part of the public court record. She was doing administrative work for a property management company in Buckhead. Ose had apparently withdrawn from her case following the mediation. And her new attorney had negotiated a settlement that gave her the joint savings account balance, minus the $38,400 adjustment, and her vehicle. She had moved to an apartment in Sandy Springs. He heard it from Calvin, who heard it from someone. He listened. He moved on the way he had learned to move on, forward, toward the work in front of him, away from the wreckage of things that had been poorly constructed and had, in the end, come down the way poorly constructed things always did. On a Sunday morning in June, he was in the back workshop, fitting the last piece of a credenza he had been building for 3 months. White oak to match the new floors, hand-cut dovetails, the joints so tight They needed only the thinnest line of glue. Jade was in the garden, pressing seedlings into the bed along the south wall, moving with the particular patience of someone who understood that growth happened on its own schedule, regardless of your intentions. It set the last drawer in its channel. He stood back. He looked at the thing he had built. His father had told him once, near the end, that the best work you do is the work that will still be standing when you are not. Not because you need the credit, because some things deserve to be built that way. Darius looked at the credenza. He looked through the open workshop door at the garden, at Jade bent over the seedlings in the morning light, at the house behind her, his house, the one whose name on the deed had always been exactly what it needed to be. He picked up his coffee. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.